It's often said that we communicate more non-verbally than we do verbally, and that's probably true. That's why it's actually impossible to not communicate. We can communicate so well because we have so many choices for communication. So let's look at these. It's worth pausing here to consider the difference between signal systems and media. We'll come back to media in the next lecture, but media involves a set of signals combined into a message stream. But the signal system is a stream of communication, but it focuses on a single form of code. We use signal systems to build our media. So media are combinations of multiple signal systems. For instance, radio uses verbal, auditory, silence. Television adds visual. If you put on a virtual reality headset, it becomes kinesthetic and haptic as well. A lot of different ways in which we use media combining different signal sets. So let's look at the signal sets. Your book highlights 7 forms of nonverbal communication. I'm going to highlight 13. I divide it just a little differently than the book does, but they're paraverbal, stillness. The 7 are paraverbal, stillness, physical, proxemics, chronemics, kinesics, and artifactual. So we'll look at 13 unique ones, or 13 different signal systems that I think are helpful to understand how we communicate. Let's talk first about symbols. We mentioned this in an earlier discussion of verbal language. They're also part or an asset in other signal sets that relate to nonverbal communication. We use certain symbols to designate other ideas. For instance, in math, there are a number of symbols we might use, each with a specific conceptual meaning. And these are symbols that replace less tangible concepts. One of the newer symbolic signals involves the emoticon, and it started as simply typed characters available on the keyboard. Over time, our computer programs have integrated them, and now our spell checkers replace the typed characters with them. And now there's these huge sets of emoticons that you can add to your message. Another use of symbol is to designate entities, organizations, companies, and such. So do you know what all these stand for? Of course, the one on the right, that's Bethany, right? Similarly, the development of universal translingual symbols give us information and direction anywhere in the world without the presence of any words. And then religions use specific symbols. These are all Christian symbols that you can see here. The cross is prominent to us, but these other symbols are used by the church in various ways. And of course, the fish symbol that was used as a secret symbol between persecuted Christians in the 1st century. Now, for verbal, as one of the signal sets, we've already covered the use of words in the previous lecture, but there are a lot of words in our language, and it is a unique signal set that we can avail of for communication. When you think about how many words we have in our language and you cross into another language, trying to learn another language, you can see the difficulty in learning another language. However, even in our own language, even though we have a huge number of words that we can choose from, we mostly use a smaller set in everyday language, in everyday communication. Now, a written system expresses those same spoken words and the ideas they form without the limits of time or space. And when you think about it, the written words are different than the words expressed. The written words are symbols that stand for the verbal words that were spoken, and the verbal words that were spoken are symbols that stand for ideas. So it's a different symbol set altogether. Because in writing, it actually lacks verbal cues, and so writing, we had to invent other verbal cues to represent things like exclamation points and things like that we use in everyday language, because we can't hear that in the written word, so we had to add it in. And as a result, the written language is actually probably more complex than verbal language, because you're trying to be more descriptive when you're writing, because you don't have the other cues that you can use in verbal language. And then numbers by themselves can be used to transfer information. They're both verbal and written. So we have the concept of one. We use the word one. but we always also have a corresponding symbol for one. I love the scene from the movie Hidden Figures. What fascinates me about it is that she's writing all these symbols and equations on the board, and all these people standing around are actually understanding what she's writing. I don't speak that language. And then there's the symbolic numeric. So sometimes a number stands in place of a concept. So the number 911 has a meaning for emergency, but in 2001, that changed and became 911. And then we all know what 24/7 means. And then we use 7 as a perfect number and 666 as an evil number. And then there's whole systems, if you want to get into personality studies, where you use the Enneagram. And then in that, there's all these different numbers that means something to the people who use this, and they talk about it all the time. They say, well, I'm a 9, but 9s work well with 3s, and those kinds of things. And if you get into it, you understand the numbers. If you're not into it, you don't know what's going on. And just for fun, sometimes a number can serve as a secret code. A1113 was the number of the classroom used by animation students at the California Institute of Arts. And then as they got jobs in studios like Pixar, they began to put that little symbol in somewhere in the movie as a way to communicate to other California Institute of Arts students, kind of a solidarity and a little kind of a whimsical way of doing so. Which brings us to pictorial. We communicate with images a lot, especially in our day. I have about 5 photos of my great-grandfather. I have about a dozen photos of my grandfather. I think I have 100 or more photos of my father. I have thousands and thousands of pictures of my grandchildren, I believe. On an average, Americans today, because of the fact that we have these cell phones in our pocket that have cameras available, we take about 20 photos a day on the average. And some of us skew that number higher than others. But most of these photos are stored in Facebook and Instagram, and this diagram just shows with the development of the instant camera in the 1950s, 1960s, all of a sudden photography became available to the masses, and it wasn't just a professional thing anymore. And look at how exponentially the number of pictures taken a year have gone since then. Pictures convey information, but they're also used like words to turn intangible concepts into tangible ones. So for instance, in advertising, mixing images can communicate quality of an SUV, or the strength of the tools that they're advertising here is somehow tied to the strength of the man using them. Pictorial communication isn't new. These are petroglyphs outside of my hometown of Albuquerque. These are relatively new, about 1300, carved by Pueblo Indians, Pueblo peoples. But there are many, many examples like this around the world. The same picture can convey this different information and feelings to different audiences. So the fish that came up first here, not everyone would see that as a delicious meal, but in some parts of the world, the fish head is for the honored guest because it's the delicacy. There's the use of sound. Music is a systemic use of sound, and it's patterned and predictable, and it has an appeal to it, but it also communicates. And different cultures use different musical notes. And so when you go to another culture, it's like the music is jarring, or it isn't as pleasant to you because it's not the system that you're used to using for music. But producers and composers use music in movies to change the pace of a movie, to signal action in a movie. And actually, different music can be used intentionally to slow you down or speed you up. It can actually lower and raise your pulse and blood pressure. So music is far more communicative than we sometimes give it credit for. It's an incredibly powerful form of communication. And then there are audio signals that are apart from music, things like whistles to call a game, or the tone of voice that we use, or the bells, or the alarms, or sirens, or ringtones all around us every day. As we said again, I just like this one. Silence is a type of audio signaling. Moreau gives it in the book its own category. That's how important it is to him. But how is it used? Well, you watched hopefully by now, the video by Julian Treasure, and he stated that it's one of the ways that our brain uses to gauge the passing of time and space, that we're actually really acutely aware of microsounds, not necessarily on a cognitive level, but we sense a change around us because of sounds within a room. We can gauge these, we can actually gauge the size of a room. And so silence and stillness are key tools available for communication. When you visit someone who's grieving a loss, in some cultures, they feel the need to create silence in the room to show their solidarities. That's solidarity and empathy with the people who've lost someone. In my own culture in North America, we generally fill the room. We allow for silence, but we feel the need to say something. And in other cultures, it's inappropriate in some of those same settings to say something. You just need to be quiet. We can use silence to communicate frustration or disappointment or thoughtfulness or wistfulness, or a well-placed pause for emphasis, or to signal completion and invite others to talk. And there's a lot of different things that we use silence for. We use artifacts to communicate. Sometimes it's just to communicate sheer wealth. This is the Air Jordan 12 OVO Drake edition. When it came out, it retailed for $100,000. It was popular with celebrities and sports stars and rappers. Why? Because it communicated the fact that they could afford it. That's all. Otherwise, it's just a shoe. Obviously, we could point to other things like cars and clothing and houses and yachts as signs of prestige that communicate. But it isn't just the wealthy who use clothing to communicate identity. Even those who don't dress fashionably choose their fashion with intention. And so sometimes people who look sloppy have worked hard to look that sloppy. Objects also communicate belonging, such as badges, patches. We incorporate symbols into our objects in fashion to demonstrate our alignment with certain ideas. And of course, we use design and architecture to communicate different things. We might build a tall building to communicate some sort of wealth and power and prestige. We decorate an office or our home to indicate what we want to do there, or how inviting it is to other people. I've been in offices of very powerful people who have intentionally designed their office to make you, as the visitor, feel very, very small, and that's what it communicates. And then we moved into this day and age what we call guerrilla advertising, and that's where we combine the pictorial with the artifactual. We turn everyday objects into powerful images, like turning a hand strap on a bus into an ad for a watch, so that you look at the strap and realize how nice that watch would look on your hand. The use of optical stimuli to communicate meaning at both conscious and subconscious levels is also a form of communication. We use lights as signals. They give information to us. Your computer screen right now is technically light transmitting information, but they also have things that can be very cultural. And then colors can communicate moods and ideas. Somehow there's the idea of green communicates nature and harmony, but it can also be wealth and stability. And different cultures actually use different colors in different ways. And then we use lighting to set the mood. Ever since the advent of LED lighting, now they use this on airlines so that they simulate a gradual sunrise or sunset to signal people to wind down during the flight. And then they use a gradual sunrise to get people moving again before landing. Oculesics is the study of the use of eyes in interpersonal communication. It actually goes with kinesthetics or kinesics, which we'll get to in a bit. It's a form of body language, but particularly related to the eyes and what they communicate. So think about eye contact. Can you make eye contact? Should you make eye contact? For how long can you make eye contact? What does that mean? What does it mean in another culture? Or do people expect eye contact? Do people avoid eye contact? Eye movement and gaze. What does it mean when people look to the left or look to the right or look away? What does it mean to stare at somebody or look past them? What does that communicate? It communicates something, and people put meaning into what you do with your eyes. Pupil dilation is more involuntary, but changes in pupil dilation can demonstrate fear, anxiety, contentment, excitement. We pick up on that, and you actually can't control it. People know when you're afraid. And then during COVID, you remember we all wore masks, and we actually learned during that time to depend more on eye gestures. And within my culture, at least, eye contact became more common, and we were looking people in the eye far more than we ever had before. And then there's gustatory and olfactory, smell and taste, and they communicate a lot of different things. Obviously, we flavor our food with different spices. Sometimes the spices we put in food don't actually change the flavor so much as they do the scent, which makes the food more appealing. And some of those scents are related to memory. So we put certain scents out at Christmas, and so we have whole stores that sell candles that have different scents, so that you can create a feel in your house by the scent. Um, and when you walk into a house with a roast in the oven, it changes your emotions, whether you like that food or not. Whatever's cooking can change your emotions. And so whole industries have developed around communicating taste and smell. Uh, and um, and and people wear perfume, people wear deodorants for a reason, to communicate something. Our ability to smell is actually pretty strong. Um, we um, we use scents to identify each other, and we're just not aware of that. It happens at the subconscious level, but we actually they've done studies that actually show that people recognize other people walking into the room by what they smell uh, as a person comes in. I don't smoke a pipe. My uncle smoked a pipe. I love my uncle. Even though I don't smoke a pipe, I feel like the smell of a pipe is always warm and pleasant to me. I would never do it myself, but boy, it just brings back all sorts of good memories. And then we also verbalize scents, and we use them as metaphors like bittersweet. And then touch is a really important form of communication. We shake hands with people. We take the handshake for granted because there's so many different ways to shake a hand. And the different ways of shaking hands communicate things like warmth and power. And in different cultures, how they shake hands and how long they shake hands and how close they stand and all of that is different ways we use the handshake. And then we actually uh, have other physical greetings as well. In Thailand, they have the Y. In French-speaking countries, they have labis. In Japan, they have the bow. In Malaysia, they have the touch, uh, the friend hug, of course, and then there's the romantic hug and the side hug. All different ways of demonstrating and communicating things through touch. Sometimes touch communicates anger, and sometimes it's uncomfortable or it hurts, but it does communicate something. And sometimes it's uncomfortable when it isn't our custom. In much of the world, men hold hands as a sign of friendship, as former President Bush awkwardly found. Point and click is an interesting touch because we use our mouse's button now to touch things, and mentally we think of ourselves as actually touching what's in the image, or reaching out to somebody else through that touch. And that's why manufacturers have put tactile feedback so that your phone buzzes or vibrates when you touch a certain point on the screen, especially in games, to help you with that sense of feeling that you're actually touching. We'll talk more about time later on and its use in communication, but it is one system we use, and we intentionally keep people waiting. We worry about being late, though there is such a thing as fashionably late, so as not to look overly eager. We arrive early. We're concerned when we're late. Our concern for time will indicate a lot about us and our attitude towards other people or even the event we're attending. We do have a sense of time and what that communicates to us, and that varies between cultures as well. And then kinesics is just study of body motion and actions, which tells us a lot about the messenger and the message. Though the precise meaning of body positions varies among cultures, just looking at this image, you can understand most of these. Emotions communicated, warmth, happiness, joy, tiredness, wistfulness, pondering, flirtiness, all sorts of things that we can communicate through our body motion. And we use this a lot. There are different types of body motion, and one is called emblems, and that's physical signals which have direct verbal counterparts. So sign language, of course, uses these, but we have things that we do in everyday life, gestures we make with our hands, but be careful because they don't always have universal meaning. In America, you point with your finger. In Asia, you don't. So just be careful. And then we synchronize our music with our music. I'm sorry. We synchronize our conversations, and we use what we call regulators. And these are actions that we actually take to intentionally synchronize our music. There I go again. Synchronize our movements with other people. So try this sometime. Stand with somebody face to face in a conversation, and then just start rocking back and forth just a little bit, and you watch and see, and it's very likely the other person will begin to move at the same pace as you are. If you're hurrying, you can actually cause other people to hurry, or you can intentionally slow down if everybody else is hurrying and cause everybody else to slow down. This image I've used here is because in traditional Midwest conversations in America, men don't face each other. They face the horizon and stand at an angle to each other. And in this situation, you can actually, if you're in this situation, you can actually turn and directly face the person, and they will move around to fix the angle again. And you can just keep them moving around. I actually have done this. I moved a man in a full circle one time. And then illustrators, just simply gestures that we use to demonstrate size. So a lot of our body movement is to illustrate things. And then affect displays, emotions, showing empathy, surprise, hurt, or anger. How much of that can be shown in another culture? I think it's important to understand that there are cultures where you have to visually suppress your anger or suppress your joy or suppress your surprise. You're not supposed to show those things publicly, only with your friends. But there are other cultures where they expect you to be incredibly expressive with your hands and show your emotions. So when you move from culture to culture, you might find yourself in awkward situations because of this. Adapters are simply the way we react to their physical state. And so, whether we're hot or cold or whatever it is, we're reacting. The space is an interesting one, spatial and proxemics. The space immediately surrounding a person that is personal and private varies between peoples, and how that space is used communicates information. So there's certain conventions for distance when talking with others based on relationship, but also on context. So in this first image, this is probably the appropriate uh, stance for these two people to have because of the relationship. It looks like it's maybe a boss or coworker, something like that. And in that social setting, this is as close as they dare get. The second image that I put up here is Lyndon Johnson, former president of the United States. He was famous for using collapsing a physical space to get power over people. He loved to intimidate people by just sticking himself right in their personal space. And then when we get on public transportation, physical space actually collapses. And so there are different rules in certain settings. So maybe you're in a culture where people don't touch each other hardly at all, but then you get on a bus and you're right up against each other and you have to renegotiate that. And so there are different rules that go into place there, but there are still rules, and this is not normally appropriate. So when we look at proxemics, we're looking at the space. This is a common chart of how that space can work in a culture, and this varies again. But there's that inner core, which is intimate space. There's only a few people in your life who are allowed to be there. And then outside of that is personal space. This is your closer friends, and they can get closer to you and spend time in your space. And so when you're having a conversation, you stand shoulder to shoulder with your arm around each other, not a big deal. But if somebody else did that, that would be violating your personal space. And then we have outside of that a ring of social space, and around 4 feet. Within that 4 feet boundary, people are allowed to be. If they're people within your network or your in group, you kind of have a sense of that. But everybody else who you don't know actually needs to stay outside of that and stay in the public space. Um, Interestingly, you can go to a store where there might be 10-foot wide aisles down the middle of the store, and you're walking towards another person, and you'll both move to the outside edge of the aisle and leave as much space as possible, because they're strangers and they don't belong in your public space, and you don't belong in their public space. So we're very aware of that. By the way, for those of you who drive, we actually extend our public space and around our car, and so we have a kind of a sense of when a car is too close to us and following too close, we're getting too close to it. There is also within proxemics the idea of fixed feature space. That's around our house, around our property. How close can you get to my property if you're uninvited? Is there a place where you can cross over? If I'm not home, you can step into my yard a certain distance and it's okay, or is there like an invisible line right at the sidewalk where you better not cross? And when you get into religion, are there sacred spaces that you should never enter, that as a foreigner or as somebody from another religion, you're just not welcome there? Similarly, semi-fixed feature spaces that around our stuff, we kind of have a barrier or a circle around our stuff. And I can set my backpack down and walk away from it, and maybe I'm standing a little further away. If somebody comes and sits next to my backpack, I'm going to get alarmed by that because they've entered my personal space, even though it's only my backpack's personal space. We actually do that. Look at an airport and watch how people protect their baggage at an airport, and how close you're allowed to get to that. And then informal space. How close can you get to me? Remember 2020 when we actually defined what personal space was, and we said 6 foot, and that's it. So yeah. And finally, for this lecture, how are objects oriented? There are 3 categories for this. Egocentric is, where are they in relationship to me? I talk about objects as being related to me, in front of me or behind me. Allocentric orientation is simply, how are things related to each other when I describe other objects? Are they beside other objects? The book is on the table, the pencil's next to the book. That's that kind of descriptions. And then the last is geographic orientation. How are things oriented to the world? Is it north, south, east, or west? And how do we see this? And as one of the other videos pointed out, there are cultures in the world that actually orientate their own personal space according to north, south, east, and west, according to the directions of the compass, and keep track of that and actually relate to each other and talk to each other with regard to that kind of direction. We hardly ever say, oh, that was east of me, unless we're giving directions in a car or something like that. Okay, thanks. And we'll come back in just a little bit for the final lecture in this lesson, which is on media.